Hey guys, in today's video we're going to compare 3 of what I think are the best budget prime lenses on Canon RF mount right now for portraits. We're going to compare the RF 35mm 1.8, the RF 50mm 1.8 and the RF 85mm f2, and we'll also compare the results of these budget primes against the RF 24-105 STM kit lens. This is for anyone who's maybe started with a kit lens and is thinking about upgrading to a prime. By the end of this video you will be able to see the differences between the zoom and the primes, and you can even download the raw files and take a look at the results for yourself. Let's kick the comparison off with a classic headshot, head and shoulders on each of the lenses. So let's start on the 35mm, where you have to be pretty close to your subject for a headshot, as you can see. This results in not the most flattering rendering of facial features really, because that perspective distortion is gonna exaggerate facial features like the nose and the forehead. Shooting in a landscape orientation does help with this a little bit, and it also demonstrates just how much of the surroundings you're capturing in the shot despite being so close to your subject. Now onto the 50mm prime, where I barely had to take a step back to frame the shot up the same, but despite this, we already see a more flattering result. We've got more in proportion facial features and a much more accurate representation of what Rachel actually looks like in real life. Side by side with the 35, I think this becomes really apparent. And also we can see the loss of background in the 50, which is isolating our subject more, but you can still see some of the location and the context of the scene. We'll deep dive into sharpness comparisons later. Right now, we're just going to focus on rendering and the overall look of these lenses. Now onto the 85mm prime, and just 2 steps back or so gives us the same framing as the other lenses. And the results for a headshot on the 85 are awesome. They are really dreamy and they have a very flattering look. This is by far the most accurate representation out of all of these lenses of what Rachel actually looks like. Side by side with the rest of the results, we can see just how much more of the background we've lost in the shot now too. The 85mm really just focuses in on your subject at this crop. And this is great for times where you might be shooting in, say, a boring environment. And you can also see the difference in how the face is rendered even over the 50. 85mm is just the start of the focal range where we are getting optimal results for close-up headshot portraits, in my opinion. But how does our kit lens stack up against these primes? Let's take a look. First of all, at every focal length, I think the 24-105 kit lens is a bit wider than it actually should be. This looks to me quite a bit wider than 35mm. Regardless, you can see how much less pop we get as we go throughout the range. The fast aperture of the primes really helps separate our subject from the background. Whereas on the kit lens, thanks to that slower aperture of this variable zoom lens, we are getting a lot more of the background and the subject in focus. But to be honest, I think all of the kit lens shots look really good, and I'm pretty surprised by the results, and I think the sharpness comparison later is going to be pretty interesting. But of course, the kit lens also has another focal length to check out, 105mm. And as you can see side by side with the 85mm f2, it doesn't catch up. We still get a lot less pop and a lot less of a 3D look, but we do get maybe slightly nicer rendering of the face thanks to the more telephoto focal length of 105mm, but still the shot does look quite flat. Later on, I'll share my overall opinions on the rendering of these primes once we've finished all the comparisons. But next up, we're going to repeat the same tests, but this time on a mid-length portrait. Starting with the 35mm, this focal length keeps you nice and close to your subject for a mid-length shot. And looking at the result, 35mm is great for this kind of a shot, especially when you want to include more of the surroundings in your image. The fast aperture gives us pop and separation, but we still know where our subject is thanks to that wider field of view. Onto 50, a step backwards gives us the same framing, so we're still nice and close. And the 50 looks really, really good for this shot too. There's quite a bit more separation with the 50 and more of a dreamy, romantic look, in my opinion. But as you can see, next to the 35mm, we are already losing quite a bit of the surroundings, like we've lost the entrance to the greenhouse in the right of the frame. About 3 steps back also gives us the same crop on our 85mm prime. And the 85 really makes our subject stand out. it gives the dreamiest look at the expense of losing the context of the scene. Side by side, you can see that we've lost the greenhouse entrance completely on the right, and really in the 85mm image, you can't particularly tell where this shot was taken. You can't tell that we're outside of a greenhouse at all. But this might be what you want if you're shooting in a less than ideal location, or if you want to omit distracting elements from a scene. Let's compare all the primes to the 24-105 kit lens now on these mid-length shots. And working through the focal lengths, a shot like this really highlights the extra pop you get from even a budget prime lens. Don't get me wrong, the kit lens looks great to be honest, but the images are just slightly more flat and less 3D looking compared to our primes. But if this is the look that you're going for, you don't always need a really shallow depth of field, then they look really good. Now let's take a look at full-length environmental portraits on each of these lenses, and this is going to really test our prime's capability to separate our subject from a busy background. Let's start with the 35mm, and even for an expansive full-length portrait, we are still nice and close to our subject and can communicate with them easily. I really like this shot. The 1.8 aperture gives us just enough separation despite the fact that we're capturing a lot of the scene along with our subject. Now onto the 50 prime, and you need quite a bit more room for a full-length shot. At this focal length, I had to step back 3 or 4 meters compared to the 35. Can't argue with the results though, because that longer focal length gives us even more pop and compression, and the image has a really nice, dreamy, 3D professional look to it. Here is the 35 and the 50 side by side, and the 50 still captures plenty of the scene in my opinion. It just adds a little bit of extra pop. Onto the 85, and I am way back now, another 4 or 5 meters, and at this point I was pretty much running out of space to work with. So if you want to shoot full lengths on an 85, make sure you're outdoors or you have plenty of space. But if you do have space, the results are great. You just get tons of 3D pop, but still enough context of the scene captured around the subject. Full length shots at 85mm have a really nice look to them, and they have a beautiful focus fall off. Let's once again compare our primes to the kit lens. Running through the focal lengths, we see more of the same. We're still getting great contrasty sharp images, but they just look a little bit more flat because of that slower aperture, especially in a full length shot like this, where the faster aperture of the prime really helps give a bit of separation between the subject and the background, because we have a really busy background here. And even if we zoom all the way out to 105mm on the kit lens, it still isn't a patch on the 85mm prime in terms of rendering. The slow aperture means that even at more telephoto focal lengths, the images still look flat, especially side by side with a prime. But what if I told you that there is another secret budget lens that gets you pretty close to the rendering of the 85mm f2? Here they are, side by side, and the secret lens is on the right, and it looks good. It gets pretty close to the 85mm prime, right? Well, I lied, it's not a secret lens. Sorry guys, that shot is just the kit lens shot at 85mm with a bit of Lightroom lens blur on it. And this is actually the first time I've ever used that function in Lightroom, and although it did do a decent job, and it's great for anybody with the kit lens who doesn't have the budget for a prime but wants to cheat the look a little bit, maybe give it a try, but just go with very subtle settings and don't overdo it. Let's look at them all side by side and see what you think. We've got the 85mm f2 prime shot on the left. We've got the kit lens shot with the Lightroom lens blur in the middle. And on the right, we've got the real kit lens shot. And as good as the Lightroom blur is doing, it just really can't replicate the real thing, because we're not getting that gradual focus fall off that we're getting with the prime lens. The background just blurs a little too suddenly on the middle shot, but what do you guys think? Would you use this tool in Lightroom? So they've all got their strengths obviously, but what about sharpness? Let's take a look. Here are our headshots, all shot wide open and zoomed into 300%. To be honest, even at this crop, they all look good enough. But I do notice that the 51.8 wide open lacks a little bit of contrast compared to the others. And zooming in on the eye to 500% does reveal to me that the sharpest of these three lenses is the 85mm f2. It is bitingly sharp with really great micro contrast. It slightly outperforms the 35mm 1.8, which I'll give second place to, The 35 looks great, and central sharpness is actually really good on this lens wide open. The 51.8 slightly lags behind the others here, mainly down to that lack of contrast wide open at 1.8, but it's also just not quite as bitingly sharp. But without zooming into unreasonable amounts, I think all of these lenses are more than sharp enough. And how do they compare to the kit lens in terms of sharpness? Well, this kit lens, or my copy at least, is actually really sharp. At each focal length against the primes, it performs just as well as the primes or even better. Of course, all of the shots on the kit lens are taken at much slower apertures, so we are naturally gonna have more of the face in focus. But even if we just focus on the eyes, this little kit lens performs really well. It does have a pretty sharp drop off at 105mm though, where at that point it lags behind the primes in terms of sharpness. Of course, stepping the primes down to similar apertures will almost certainly yield sharper results from the primes. So which one of these lenses should you choose? Well, I'm gonna try and help. And starting with the 35mm, this lens really excels at environmental portraits. 35 captures a wider scene than traditional portrait focal lengths, and this allows you to really show the surroundings and add context and storytelling elements to an image. So I think it's perfect for lifestyle, travel portraits, fashion, or any time you are shooting in a fantastic location. It just won't give you the most flattering headshots. And the 50 is a Swiss Army knife lens, a real jack of all trades. If you've got the space, you'll still get really great environmental portraits, despite that tighter focal length. And 50mm as a focal length in general is just starting to give you flattering headshots. In my experience, it is really rare that a 50mm prime won't work in most scenarios for portraits. Now, it may not be the absolute best option for the job, but it will work. Finally, onto the 85, which is absolutely excellent for mid-length shots, and it is beautiful for headshots. It'll naturally remove a lot of the context of the location from your image, so it's great for times where you want all the focus on your subject and not the location. If you shoot a lot of headshots, this is the obvious choice to me, but you do also need a lot of space to capture full-length shots, and on location, that's not always going to be possible. The 85 is super sharp too, up to L lens quality in my opinion. And here is all the results on screen, and don't forget, you can download all of these raw files if you want to take a closer look. So overall, what would I recommend? And if we're talking strictly portraits, not travel or video or any other use case, then it's really hard not to recommend the 50mm 1.8 prime. It just works, it'll complement a zoom lens really well, and it'll be one of those lenses that you can keep in your kit for years as your lens collection grows around it. And if we consider price, then the 50mm wins here by a landslide too, being the cheapest of the three lenses. I think I picked mine up for about £100 here in the UK used. And to get the kind of versatility that the 50mm gives you and to cover all your bases, you could always pick up the 35 and the 85 for a two lens combination. I mean, that is a fantastic combination for all use cases, but then at that point you're spending almost £1,000. So that's it. It of course comes down to you and your shooting style, which one of these you go with, and you honestly can't really go wrong with any of them. They all offer great results, and 35 and the 50 in particular are actually some of my most used and trusted lenses. The 85 is hugely underrated in my opinion, and it gets a lot of criticism for its autofocus, but I think that it is optically fantastic and delivers really professional results. But let me know down in the comments below which of these lenses you would choose if you could only have one of them for portraits for the rest of your days. Mine would definitely be the 50 for its versatility. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope this video was helpful. If you want to see other comparisons from me, then let me know down below what you want to see. But until then, I will see you all in the next one.